It is one of the most iconic silhouettes on the road, a profile etched into the collective imagination. The powerful mass of an American truck, crowned by two chrome exhaust pipes pointing toward the clouds like cannons. To the untrained eye, it is a gesture of mechanical machismo, an adornment, a stylistic whim of a driver who wants to make noise. But that image, that assumption, is merely the cover of a book that tells a much deeper story. It is the story of a silent war against heat, noise, and geography. It is the physical map of two industrial philosophies that divided a continent and defined how the world moves. Because the real question is not, why do trucks have their exhaust pipes pointing upwards? But why do some trucks have them pointing upwards, while others hide them like a secret? The answer is not in a design manual. It is on the dusty roads of the 1940s, in the cold calculations of German aerodynamics, and in the daily struggle for a centimeter of space under a chassis. Today, we will follow the trail of those hot gases to discover that a simple pipe can contain the essence of a culture, the intelligence of engineering, and the very future of transportation. To understand why an exhaust pipe decided to rise, you have to look down. You have to bend down and look under the truck, into that dark, dusty, vibrating space that most people ignore. There, in the bowels of the vehicle, the need that would forge an icon was born. This chapter is not just about a piece of metal, it is about an act of engineering desperation that became a cry of identity. It is the chronicle of how North America, faced with its own titanic dimensions and the harshness of its machines, found a solution that, over time, transcended function to merge with the very soul of the truck. We will trace the path from pragmatic problem to cultural symbol, from scorching heat to chrome gleaming in the sun. Because before the exhaust pointed skyward in defiance, it did so as an act of pure survival. Chaos under the chassis. Imagine the skeleton of a heavy truck from the 1930s or 1940s. It is not the clean, modular platform of today, it is a jungle of steel. The chassis, the backbone of the vehicle, consists of two parallel heavy rigid C or I-shaped beams. Connecting them are a series of cross members, like ribs, that provide torsion and support. Within this basic scaffolding, life bustles chaotically. Hanging or mounted between these steel members, a zoo of systems competes fiercely for every cubic inch of space. The fuel tanks, cylindrical and bulky, hang on the sides. The air reservoir for the pneumatic brakes, another metal cylinder, finds its niche. A maze of hoses and brass lines winds its way everywhere. High-pressure air lines for the brakes, fuel lines, electrical cables protected by sheaths. The suspension, whether solid leaf springs or primitive pneumatic systems, adds its mass of springs, arms, and constantly moving axles. The transfer case, the secondary transmission, the drive shaft spinning at frenetic speeds. It's a mechanical universe in turmoil. And in the midst of this organized chaos, the problem arises: the exhaust system. In its early days, it was a simple pipe that came out of the engine's exhaust manifold and snaked its way around looking for a rear or side exit. But this was no ordinary pipe. It was the conduit of hell. The diesel engines of the time, although less efficient than today's, expelled combustion gases at temperatures that could easily exceed 600 or 700 degrees Celsius. That pipe, red hot or close to it, was a diseased vital organ, a limb radiating a deadly fever. Placing it in the undercarriage was an invitation to disaster. The risk of fire was constant. A fuel line that softened and punctured, a cable that lost its insulation, an accumulation of leaves or grease. Anything flammable that touched that incandescent pipe could trigger a catastrophe. In addition, the residual heat raised the temperature of the entire environment, negatively affecting other components, such as the fuel in the tanks or the efficiency of the pneumatic systems. The exhaust under the chassis was not a solution. It was a time bomb, a fundamental problem that cried out for a radical solution. The engineers needed to get that fire-breathing dragon out of its congested cave. They needed to give it air, space, and above all, distance it from everything else. And so, almost by default, their gaze began to ascend. But removing it from underneath not only solved the heat problem, it was the answer to another equally relentless enemy, the road itself. Rocks, puddles, and dirt roads. To understand the next reason, you have to forget about smooth, predictable paved highways. Think of the arteries of North America in the first half of the 20th century. Secondary roads that were little more than packed dirt tracks, rutted with deep wheel tracks. primitive pavements that cracked and gave way to loose stones. Roads that, when it rained, turned into treacherous mud pits or flooded at river crossings. The operating environment for a truck was, at best, hostile. At worst, it was a battlefield. An exhaust system mounted under the chassis, just 30 or 40 centimeters from the ground, was in the permanent line of fire. A stone thrown up by a front wheel or front could hit the pipe or muffler with the force of a projectile, denting it, cracking a weld, or, in the worst case, bursting it. A speed bump taken at the wrong speed could mean the muffler being crushed against the ground. But the most insidious danger was water. A diesel engine works by compression. If water enters the cylinders, it does not compress like air, it is incompressible. The result is a hydrolock. The piston, on its upward stroke, encounters a liquid barrier that it cannot overcome. The connecting rod bends, the crankshaft suffers a brutal impact, and the engine self-destructs in an instant. A low exhaust, especially if it had a low point or a rear outlet pointing downwards, was a perfect intake pipe for water. When crossing a deep puddle, water could be sucked in by the effect of the expulsion of gases and the subsequent vacuum, traveling through the pipe towards the engine. It was a silent and sudden death sentence. Raising the exhaust solved all three problems in one brilliant stroke. By running it vertically up the side of the cab or behind it, it was kept safe. Rocks could no longer reach it. Speed bumps and obstacles on the ground were far below. And the outlet, now 2 meters or more above the ground, was safe from all but the most biblical floods. It wasn't a question of style, it was a question of robustness and reliability. It was the pure logic of air raid shelters. If the ground is your enemy, escape upwards. However, there was another enemy, even more penetrating than water and more constant than stones, from which it was also necessary to escape. An enemy that did not attack the truck, but the man who drove it: noise. The Screaming Jimmies and the battle against noise. We now enter legendary territory, the sonic heart of a mechanical era. To understand the next driving force behind vertical exhaust, we must introduce an unforgettable protagonist, the Detroit diesel two-stroke engine. Affectionately and aptly nicknamed Screaming Jimmy, these engines not only powered American industry, they sang it, or rather screamed it with a heart-wrenching voice. Their operation was what made them unique and raucous. Unlike a conventional four-stroke diesel engine, intake, compression, combustion, exhaust, the two-stroke completes the cycle in just 2 piston strokes. Intake and exhaust are not performed by valves in the cylinder head, but by ports, holes in the cylinder walls that the piston uncovers and covers as it moves up and down. To wash the burned gases and introduce fresh air, they use a scavenging compressor, a blower, that forces pressurized air into the crankcase and through the ports. This process is extremely fast and less refined. The acoustic result was an otherworldly mechanical cacophony. The sound of the blower, a high-pitched constant whine, mingled with the explosions of the cylinders, which occurred at twice the frequency of a similarly sized four-stroke engine. A Detroit diesel 8571, 8 cylinders in a V configuration, with 71 cubic inches of displacement per cylinder, did not sound like 8 cylinders. With its frantic two-stroke cycle and unmistakable tone, to the human ear it sounded like 16. It was a raspy, metallic, high-pitched, piercing roar, a sound that filled the air for miles around and seeped into the cab through every crack and crevice. This is where the tension arose. Manufacturers and drivers needed to silence this noisy beast. But the mufflers of the time were simple devices that worked by absorbing and reflecting sound, creating back pressure. Applying a very restrictive muffler to a two-stroke engine, which depends on a very free flow of gases for its scavenging, was like covering its mouth and nose. It drastically robbed it of power, made it inefficient and overheated it. It was a solution worse than the problem. Then came the second stroke of pragmatic genius. If you can't silence the scream efficiently, move the screamer's mouth away. By moving the exhaust upward, and especially by ending it in a bell or straight cut without a restrictive muffler, known as a straight pipe, 2 things were achieved. First, the sound was no longer directed toward the ground and reflected directly into the cabin. It was projected upward and to the sides, where it dispersed more quickly into the atmosphere. Second, by reducing or eliminating the back pressure from the muffler, the engine breathed better and performed to its maximum potential. The vertical exhaust thus became a strategically oriented megaphone. It pointed the roar away from the driver, toward the sky, where it would bother the person who drove 12 hours a day less. It was a wildly ergonomic solution, a pact with the devil of noise in exchange for mechanical health and power. But there was another facet of life on the road, an intimate and vulnerable facet that also demanded that those gases be moved away. The facet of rest. The sleeper cab and the line between comfort and danger. The life of a long-distance truck driver did not stop at the end of the day. The economics of transcontinental travel required the driver to sleep on the road in an enlarged cab that included a small bedroom behind the seat. These mobile beds were a Spartan refuge, a sanctuary of rest in the midst of immensity. But they brought with them a critical need and a deadly danger. The need was for climate control. In the freezing cold of a North Dakota winter or the humid heat of a Texas summer, turning off the engine meant condemning yourself to a night of hypothermia or suffocation. The solution was to keep the diesel engine idling for hours so that the heating system or the primitive air conditioning, which ran on engine compression, could maintain a livable temperature in the bedroom. The deadly danger had a name: carbon monoxide, CO. This colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas is a lethal byproduct of incomplete combustion. An idling engine, especially a less efficient one like those of the time, could generate it in significant quantities. The danger was not so much a massive leak as a slow and insidious seepage. Exhaust gases, if the outlet was low and close to the cabin, could be carried away by wind turbulence, sucked into ventilation systems, or simply seep through door and window seals. Inside the confined, enclosed space of the sleeper, CO would accumulate silently. The initial symptoms are subtle: headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion. An exhausted driver might attribute them to fatigue. But in sleep, poisoning progresses rapidly to unconsciousness and death. Vertical exhaust was, in this context, a vital life-saving system. By raising the point of emission of the gases to a considerable height above the cabin, the basic laws of physics were exploited. Hot gases are less dense and tend to rise. When expelled 2 meters or more above the roof, they were caught by air currents and quickly dispersed into the atmosphere, far from any windows or air intakes in the cabin. The exhaust tower became a night watchman, a steel guardian that banished invisible danger to the heights, ensuring that the whisper of the idling engine was a lullaby and not a requiem. In this way, what began as a solution to heat, then to shock, then to noise, became a pillar of human safety. And when a part accumulates so many layers of crucial functionality, it is destined to become something more. The chrome soul of the American truck. Thus, the vertical exhaust pipe ceased to be a simple component. It had proven its worth on too many fronts. It was a shield against heat, armor against the terrain, passive sound insulation, and a guardian of health. It had earned its place. And in American culture, deeply linked to the highway and the symbolism of its machines, that place could not remain merely utilitarian. The transition from practical to emblematic was organic. First, the black functional pipe began to be protected with heat-resistant paint. Then someone had the idea of polishing it. The shine of the bare metal, resisting heat and soot, projected an image of robustness and care. Chrome, that mirror-like finish that defines the mid-century American automotive dream, made its way to the exhaust stacks. No longer they were just pipes. They were stacks, chrome columns that glistened under the desert sun or the neon lights of a truck stop. Customization did the rest. Drivers, whose truck was both their work tool, their home at times, and their main possession, began to make that part their own. Crowns or caps of different designs were added: straight cuts, 45-degree angle cuts, flared bells. The height could vary. Sometimes the base was wrapped with a decorative leather sleeve. The stacks became the driver's signature, a way of standing tall and saying, "This is my truck." They became part of the overall aesthetic. On a Kenworth W900 or a classic Peterbilt 379, the long lines of the hood, the chrome grille, the round headlights, and the shiny stacks formed a harmonious and powerful visual composition. The vertical exhaust was no longer an add-on. It was a structural element of the design, the literal crowning glory of the steel horse, as iconic and identifiable as the sound of the engine that breathed through it. It represented the trucker's independence, his ability to master the machine and the road. It was a symbol of an era, of a way of understanding transportation, big, powerful, loud, and proud. But while this symbol reigned supreme on the vast highways of America, On the other side of the ocean, a completely different mindset faced the same problems with an opposite response. A response that did not point to the sky, but crawled stealthily in the shadow of the chassis. There, where the streets were 1,000 years old and space was an unattainable luxury, efficiency was not measured in inches of chrome, but in millimeters of aerodynamic drag and cents saved per kilometer. The counter-philosophy was about to be born, and its argument would be as cold, calculating, and relentless as the wind whistling between the medieval buildings. While in North America, the exhaust rose like a steel banner, in Europe a diametrically opposed philosophy was born, forged not in the vastness of the plains, but in the age-old narrowness of its roads. Here, grandiloquence had no place. Survival did not depend on dominating space, but on slipping through it. This chapter is the story of that counter-philosophy, a narrative driven not by pride in symbolism, but by the tyranny of physics and the harshness of economics. It is the chronicle of how Europe, constrained by its own history and geography, was forced to invent a different truck, and how that invention unleashed an obsession with efficiency that would ultimately redefine the global industry. Here, the exhaust is not a tower, it is a whisper. It is not a cry of identity. It is a cold calculation on a balance sheet. Let us delve into the world where aerodynamics reigns supreme and every protrusion is a mortal sin. Medieval streets and advanced cabins. To understand European logic, you have to abandon the open frontier mentality. Imagine, instead, a landscape shaped by centuries. Cities that grew within medieval walls, with streets that were laid out for carriages, not 16-meter semi-trailers. Roundabouts fitted to the centimeter. 19th century railway tunnels converted for road traffic with their low, immovable stone arches. Historic bridges with sacred weight and height restrictions. In this context, a truck is not a free titan, it is an intruder that must ask permission at every turn. In this scenario, the American vertical exhaust was not a symbol of power, it was an invitation to disaster. Two metal towers protruding almost half a meter above the cab roof became magnets for catastrophe. A sharp turn under a stone arch could mean the violent tearing off of the entire exhaust system. A low tunnel could destroy the cab. Even when parking in old loading docks, the towers could get caught on awnings, canopies, or cranes. The risk of structural damage and costly repairs was constant and prohibitive. The European response to this space limitation was not to adapt the exhaust, but to reinvent the truck from scratch. Thus, the cab-over engine, COE, was born. The philosophy was brutally logical. If the overall length of the vehicle is limited by law, as in most European countries, in order to maneuver in those narrow streets, every inch of that length must be devoted to cargo, not mechanics. Therefore, the engine is placed under the cab, not in front of it. The driver sits practically on the front axle. This configuration changes everything. The cab is compact, an efficient cube that maximizes space for the trailer. And in this cube, there is no room for exhaust towers rising up the sides. The engine is so integrated and covered that removing a vertical exhaust would require drilling through the cab floor or creating bulky side protrusions that would, again, steal interior space or increase width. It was an unworkable solution. The exhaust then had no choice but to follow the only path available, down and back, hiding in the already congested space under the chassis. But what began as a constraint due to lack of space soon revealed itself to be an unexpected advantage on a completely different battlefield, the war against air. How a pipe can cost a fortune in fuel. If the European limitation was first urban, it soon became physical and economic. And here we enter the realm of aerodynamics, the science that dictates how an object moves through the air. For a truck traveling at 50 miles per hour, air is not an invisible medium. It is a dense wall, an invisible mud that offers resistance. That resistance, called drag, is the number one enemy of efficiency. Imagine the airflow over a modern truck. As it moves forward, the air hits the front of the cab, splits, and flows over the roof and sides. The critical problem occurs at the rear of the cab. There, the air that has detached from its surfaces encounters a void. The gap between the cab and the front of the trailer. This space is necessary for the articulated unit to turn. But aerodynamically, it is a disaster zone. As the air enters this gap, it becomes turbulent, creating a chaotic vortex that sucks energy from the truck's movement, like a parachute that constantly opens and closes. Now, introduce a vertical exhaust into this scenario. Those towers, protruding cleanly from the cabin profile, are perfect flow disruptors. They act like small posts in the middle of a stream. The air flowing smoothly along the side of the cabin collides with them, generating mini turbulence and vortex trails. But the most pernicious effect occurs right in that critical area behind the cab. A vertical exhaust located there acts like a miniature windbreaker, trapping even more air in the turbulent zone, preventing it from flowing in a more or less orderly manner and, in essence, driving an anchor into that chaotic air parachute. The result is measured at the fuel pump. Industry studies and empirical data estimate that a truck with a vertical exhaust and no roof deflector, a spoiler that redirects air toward the trailer, can suffer a 3 to 7% increase in fuel consumption compared to a truck with a clean aerodynamic design. On a 1,000-kilometer trip, that percentage translates into dozens of liters of diesel burned solely to overcome the drag created by a few simple pipes. In a world where fuel was becoming increasingly expensive, this was not an aesthetic detail, it was an economically unsustainable design flaw. And when the price per liter is the final arbiter, the equation becomes ruthless. When every drop of diesel is worth its weight in gold. Europe's obsession with aerodynamics was not born out of an abstract love of physics. It was born out of cold, hard economic reality. Historically, due to extremely high taxes designed to discourage consumption and finance infrastructure, the price of diesel in Europe has been consistently double, or more, that in the United States. While an American trucker could afford a certain amount of waste as part of the cost of being big, a European trucker saw every hundredth of a litre burned uselessly as a direct stab at his already narrow profit margin. The numbers, in this context, speak for themselves. Imagine a modest fleet of 100 trucks. Each one travels about 150,000 kilometers per year. With a base consumption of 35 liters per 100 kilometers, the fleet burns 5.25 million liters of diesel per year. If a poorly positioned vertical exhaust and poor aerodynamic design inflate that consumption by just 5%, we are talking about an extra 262,500 liters. Multiply that by the European price of diesel. The resulting figure is astronomical, a black hole in the finances that can mean the difference between a profitable fleet and one that is bleeding dry. That is why, in Europe, aerodynamic efficiency ceased to be an R&D department and became the core of the business. Manufacturers, Scania, Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, DAF, MAN, Iveco, competed fiercely to reduce the consumption figure in the specifications. A truck that advertised 0.5 liters less per 100 kilometers than its competitor won contracts for entire fleets. In this ecosystem of ruthless competition for hundredths of a liter, the vertical exhaust was a stupid luxury. The horizontal exhaust, integrated under the chassis, became imperative. It was not a design option, it was a sine qua non condition for survival in the market. And just as this aerodynamic battle was intensifying, a new technological revolution arrived to complicate matters even further and to prove the horizontal design definitively right. The electronic intestines of the modern truck, SCR, DPF, and the death of the simple exhaust. At the beginning of the 21st century, exhaust engineering faced its greatest transformation since the invention of the muffler. It was no longer enough to remove the gases and reduce the noise a little. Increasingly stringent Euro emission standards required the gases to be chemically cleaned before being released into the atmosphere. After-treatment systems entered the scene, an electronic gut that turns the simple exhaust into a chemical laboratory on wheels. Two components became universal and widespread. The diesel particulate filter, DPF or FAP, a cylinder filled with a porous ceramic material that traps microscopic soot particles, black smoke. And the selective catalytic reduction, SCR system, which includes a tank of a liquid called AdBlue, a urea solution, and a special catalyst. This system injects AdBlue into the hot gases, causing a chemical reaction that converts harmful nitrogen oxides, NOx, into nitrogen and water vapor, harmless components of the air. These systems are huge, heavy, and above all, thermally sensitive. To prevent clogging, the DPF must be regenerated periodically. Its internal temperature is raised above 600 degrees to burn off the accumulated soot. The SCR catalyst only works optimally within a very specific temperature range. Here, the exhaust design became critical. Installing this complex package of components in a vertical tower is a monumental engineering challenge. It involves very long pipes from the turbo to the base of the tower, causing heat loss, delays in the systems reaching their operating temperature, and increased weight at height, which affects stability. In addition, maintenance would be a nightmare. The logical, almost mandatory solution is to pack this entire system as close to the engine as possible, under the chassis. The pipes are shorter, which minimizes heat loss and allows the after-treatment systems to warm up quickly. Weight is kept low and centered, improving vehicle dynamics. Access for maintenance is easier. The horizontal exhaust, already an aerodynamic and urban necessity, proved to be the only viable architecture for the after-treatment era. It marked the definitive technical demise of the exhaust as a simple pipe and established the low profile as the standard of modern engineering. But Europeans did not stop there. They turned this necessity into a virtue and virtue into an art. The silhouette that beats the wind. The acceptance of the horizontal exhaust was not an act of resignation. It was the starting point for a crusade of aerodynamic perfection. European manufacturers began to see the truck not as a collection of parts, but as a single system whose performance depended on the harmony of its silhouette with the wind. Every bulge, every crevice, every right angle became an enemy to be defeated. Thus was born an arsenal of components designed to sculpt the flow of air. The roof deflector became larger and more adjustable, directing air from the top of the cab to the roof of the trailer. Side skirts appeared under the doors, guiding air cleanly around the front wheels and the complex space of the axles. Aerodynamic covers for the rear wheels became commonplace, reducing the chaotic vortex generated by exposed tires. Rear-view mirrors were redesigned with aerodynamic profiles, sometimes even with small deflectors of their own. And in the midst of this revolution, the horizontal exhaust was no longer something to hide. It was integrated. Clean side exhaust outlets were designed, often oriented downward behind the rear wheels, or rear outlets integrated into the bumper. The pipe was shortened, straightened, and elegantly packaged. The goal was no longer just to avoid drag, it was to create a smooth, orderly laminar flow that enveloped the truck with as little friction as possible. This battle between vertical tradition and horizontal efficiency seemed to have well-defined continents. But the globalized world has a curious way of erasing borders. And what began as a European imposition began to seep into the very sanctuary of the chrome exhaust, forcing American giants to make a decision that many purists would consider a betrayal. Economic and environmental logic, armed with after-treatment systems and volatile fuel prices, began to cross the Atlantic. The result would not be the surrender of a continent, but an epic clash, a forced hybridization, and a future where the choice of pipe would no longer speak only of geography, but of a much more complex global equation. The history of truck exhaust reaches its decisive moment not with a clash, but with a slow and powerful convergence. The two philosophies, the vertical American and the horizontal European, are no longer separated by an ocean, but face each other on every specification sheet of every global manufacturer. This final chapter explores the present, a present of choice forced by market laws, and the future, a future that threatens to render the original question irrelevant. Here, the exhaust pipe ceases to be a matter of geography and becomes a symptom of something greater. The eternal struggle between soul and efficiency, between personal identity and corporate logic, between the roar of the past and the silence of the future. It is the chronicle of an inevitable hybridization, of niches that resist like cultural bunkers, and of an energy horizon that rewrites all the rules. The silent invasion, how efficiency crossed the Atlantic. The change was not announced with a manifesto, but with a catalogue. In the early 2000s, the major American manufacturers, those guardians of the long-nosed tradition and chrome stacks, began to launch a new generation of models. Names like the Kenworth T680, Peterbilt 579, Freightliner Cascadia, and Western Star 5700 weren't just new trucks. They were statements of intent. Their design was radically different. Taller, more rounded cabs, huge roof deflectors, side skirts, and, most tellingly, horizontal exhaust offered as standard factory configuration. Vertical stacks did not disappear. They became an option. And in industry parlance, when an iconic feature becomes optional, it is because it has lost the commercial war. The reason was an economic calculation identical to the one that had dominated Europe for decades, but which was now becoming universal. The large trucking fleets, Swift, Schneider, JB Hunt, Knight-Swift, that move thousands of trucks and whose business is pure logistics, began to buy by the numbers. A purchasing executive in a Dallas office doesn't see a symbol of the road. He sees a spreadsheet with a column called Total Cost of Ownership. When Freightliner or Peterbilt engineers showed them, with irrefutable data, that a horizontal exhaust integrated with a complete aerodynamic design could improve fuel efficiency by 2, 3, or even 5% over the stack configuration, the decision was made. For a fleet of 1,000 trucks, that percentage translated into savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The roar of the vertical exhaust for them was the sound of money going down the drain. The silent invasion was not European, it was the invasion of accounting. Efficiency, like a virus, had crossed the Atlantic in financial reports and infected the very heart of the American trucking business. The horizontal exhaust was no longer a European oddity but had become the new global standard for efficiency. But the market standard is one thing, and the heartbeat of a culture is quite another. The last bastion, why vertical exhaust still isn't dead. Despite the unstoppable advance of efficiency, chrome towers have not fallen. They have retreated to their bastions, where their values are measured not in litres per kilometre, but in inches of pride and extreme functionality. There are 3 such bastions, each defending tradition for a powerful reason. The first is the world of show and custom trucks. Here, the truck is not a tool, it is a work of art, a monumental extension of its owner's personality. At these shows and competitions, stacks are a sacred element, the equivalent of longhorns on a pedigree bull. They are polished to a mirror finish, curved at impossible angles, fitted with resonators that modulate the sound, and painted with flames or custom designs. Removing them would be like removing a king's crown. They represent the ultimate expression of American trucker culture, a living tribute to a golden age. Here, efficiency is blasphemy. What matters is presence, sound, spectacle. The second bastion is that of trucks for specific and extreme jobs. Think of the monstrous logging trucks that operate in swampy terrain, or the mining machines that must wade through streams and puddles of unpredictable depth. For them, the original argument from the 1940s remains as valid as ever. A high vertical exhaust is a guarantee of survival. It keeps the engine's breathing system safe from the water, mud and debris that fly around in these brutal environments. In these cases, a horizontal exhaust would be a sentence of mechanical death. Pure, hard functionality keeps the vertical solution alive in its natural environment. The third and most significant bastion is the independent owner-operator. This man or woman, who does not drive for a large fleet but for themselves, whose truck is both their office, their most valuable asset, and often their home, has a completely different relationship with the machine. For them, the truck is not a number in a fleet. It is their rolling identity. Stacks are not an accessory, they are his signature on the road, a symbol of independence, of craftsmanship, of not having bowed to corporate homogenization. Accepting the horizontal exhaust, for many, would be to betray a fundamental part of what it means to be an old-school trucker. In this bastion, economics sometimes gives way to pride, because pride is also part of the business. It's what makes it dignified. However, while this culture war rages on, a much deeper technological revolution is brewing in engineering workshops. A revolution that doesn't choose sides, but renders them obsolete. Beyond diesel, exhaust in the age of electrification and hydrogen. The discussion between vertical and horizontal presupposes an unquestionable truth. That there is something to escape, a hot gas from combustion. But what if that gas disappears? The future of heavy transport is racing toward decarbonization, and in that future, the concept of exhaust as we know it undergoes a radical metamorphosis. First, the battery-powered electric truck. Here, the answer is simple and liberating. There is no exhaust. There is no combustion, therefore no exhaust gases. The electric motor and its power systems generate heat, but this is dissipated by radiators and liquid cooling circuits that require small, discrete air intakes, similar to those on a modern car. The design is freed from its most iconic constraint. Engineers no longer have to plan the route of a hot pipe, they have to optimize battery cooling and pure aerodynamics. the silhouette can become cleaner, more integrated, more like a spaceship than a steam engine. The absence of the pipe is the greatest victory of aerodynamic design. Then, an intermediate technology appears, the hydrogen fuel cell truck. This vehicle has an electric motor, but the electricity is generated on board by reacting hydrogen and oxygen from the air in a fuel cell. The only byproduct of this electrochemical reaction is water vapor. That's right, the exhaust from a hydrogen truck is essentially pure water in a gaseous state. Here, the pipe returns, but its meaning changes completely. It is no longer the conduit for pollution and noise, but a humble outlet for harmless vapor. Its design is not dictated by heat or back pressure, but by the need to prevent that vapor from condensing and freezing in cold climates. It could be a small side or rear opening, discreet and functional. The post-diesel era does not eliminate the pipe in all cases, but it does eliminate forever its symbolism of fossil power and its raucous sound. The vertical versus horizontal debate then shifts to a purely packaging and styling issue, stripped of its heavier historical and technical baggage. The final decision, a question of philosophy, not engineering. At the end of the journey, after exploring history, geography, physics and economics, we realized that the choice of exhaust was never really technical. Engineering only provided the tools. The final choice has always been, and continues to be, philosophical. For the fleet manager, whether in Rotterdam or Dallas, the philosophy is pure economic utilitarianism. Their universe is governed by total cost of ownership, TCO. Each component is a variable in an equation whose sole objective is to minimize expenses and maximize profits. In that equation, a vertical exhaust that adds drag is a positive term on the expense side. Therefore, it is eliminated. Their choice is cold, rational, and perfectly logical within their frame of reference. The truck is a revenue-generating asset. For the independent owner-operator or enthusiast, the philosophy is personalism and emotional connection. Their truck is a life companion, a witness to thousands of miles, a labor of love and sweat. In their frame of reference, value lies not only in numbers, but in the feel behind the wheel, in the pride of parking at a truck stop, in the legacy it represents. Chrome stacks are a positive term in the equation of identity and personal satisfaction. Removing them would be an act of self-denial. Their choice is warm, identity-based, and also perfectly rational within their world. Neither position is wrong. Both are valid answers to the fundamental question, what is a truck for? The fleet's answer is, to move goods as cheaply as possible. The independent's answer is, to live a life of freedom and craftsmanship on wheels. The exhaust pipe is only the most visible symptom of this fundamental divergence. It is the tip of the iceberg of two industrial souls that coexist, sometimes in tension, on the same road. Reading trucks by their silhouettes, the secret code of the highway. The next time you're on a highway, at a rest stop, or crossing a bridge, play this game. Look at the trucks passing by. You will no longer see them as mere large vehicles. You will see open books, rolling stories told by their silhouette. If you see one with a tall chrome exhaust pipe, gleaming like a polished steel beacon, emerging from behind a long, angular cab, you're looking at more than just a truck. You are seeing a piece of living history. It is the flag of independence, the stubborn pride of a profession that refuses to be homogenized. It is the echo of the screaming Jimmies roaring across the deserts. It is the conscious choice of an individual who prioritizes identity and tradition over the last decimal point of consumption. It is a mobile monument to the era of classic diesel. If you see one with a sleek profile, an invisible exhaust integrated under the chassis, deflectors and skirts sculpting the air, you're looking at the present and future of global logistics. It is efficiency made metal. It is the cold calculation of a cost algorithm, the willingness to sacrifice dramatic gesture for quiet profitability. It is the perfect machine for a world of just-in-time deliveries, satellite-managed fleets, and sustainability measured in grams of CO2 per ton-kilometer. It is the truck as a cell of a planetary economic nervous system. Both are right. Both are necessary. The first keeps alive the soul, culture, and craftsmanship of the road. The second moves the world in an increasingly intelligent and sustainable way. The smoke that once came out of that pipe, whether into the sky or onto the ground, is dissipating. But the choice it represents remains. The exhaust pipe, in the end, ceased to be just a conduit for gases. It became the thermometer of an industry, measuring the tension between the heart and the mind. On the compass of the road, where the needle oscillates eternally between two equally powerful poles, legend and ledger, the legend of the road and the book of accounts. And as long as there are trucks on the road, there will be someone deciding, with every purchase, every customization, which pole their compass points to. The story continues, kilometer by kilometer.